Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are finishing the reading of Stars of Chaos Volume 3, also known as Lang by Priest, recovering chapters 89 and 90. So sorry it took a little longer than expected. The start to this year has been kind of crazy with lots of change, some good and some bad. But anyway, I hope you all enjoy these last two chapters, and I can't wait to see you for Volume 4. Chapter 89, Suffering a Beating. Now that he'd gained the opportunity to drive this unbelievably swift Western dragon with his own two hands, Guchun considered his stint hanging like air-dried pork time well spent. He rubbed his hands all over the control panel with a lascivious look on his face, hungry as a lecher who had spied a peerless beauty. It was a miracle he wasn't drooling. A strangely colored firework burst from the water of the river. It was Gu Yuan's guard, who had drawn everyone's attention before diving into the waters. Guchun drove the Western Dragon straight for the signal. In short order, an iron cable the thickness of a child's arm shot out from the warship with stunning force, carving through the wind with a shrill whine. As expected of the Black Iron Battalion, not only was the man unafraid of this lethal weapon, he quickly grabbed onto it. Towing along by the iron cable, he swept out in an arc before flipping himself over the cable and onto the deck of the Western Dragon. "Hold on tight!" yelled Guchun. "Marshal, the Lingshu Institute has been lusting after these Western Dragons for half an age. Now that we've finally gotten our hands on one, if you ask us to wait on you hand and foot or eat your table scraps to show our gratitude, we'll gladly do it," he finished with a cackle. Scholar Gus steered the dragon like he was out for a joyride. Everyone aboard tumbled this way and that till they could do nothing but cling to the railings for dear life. Gu Yuan's ears were filled with the roar of roiling river currents crashing against the flanks of the dragon. He gritted his teeth and thought, "I had him all tied up a second ago. Why didn't it occur to me to give him a solid beating?" The Western Dragon shot past the sea monster as if on swift wings. By now, it was too late for the Westerners to give chase, even if they wanted to. The soldiers of the Western garrison on the south bank finally came to their senses and made to pursue them, their faces pale or red with anger. But before any orders could be given, a dark and teeming mass of Great Liang dragons sailed out of their harbor across the river. Mr. Jha lowered his field scope, shocked, and barked out a string of rapid commands. "Hold it! Don't follow up, it's a trap! All fleets, fall in line and prepare to engage! Shit! The Central Plains people have huddled in their shells all this time. Why have they launched an offensive today?" The Pope also had a nasty look on his face. He personally escorted the whiskered man, likely the rumored guest from the Holy Empire, from the tent. The two gazed at each other, apparently in harmony, but actually at odds. The Pope turned to look at the massive forces of the Jiangbei garrison encroaching on their perimeter with worried eyes. The Western Dragon scudding across the river vanished into the ranks of the Great Liang dragons in the blink of an eye. Both sides faced off in full battle array. Then, beneath the shocked gazes of their enemy, the Great Liang navy turned their prows and slowly retreated without doing a single thing, as if they'd merely come to strike a pose. Never mind the befuddled Western Navy they left in their wake. When old General Zhong Chan had received Chang'eng's message via Wooden Bird, he'd suffered the fright of his life and viciously cursed this madman's deranged behavior under his breath. Still, with Prince Yan and Marshal Gu both gracing the front lines with their presence, Zhong Chan and Yao Zhen, as the military and civil leaders of Jiangbei, were obligated to come greet them. Zhong Chan made a bow according to the rules of etiquette. "This lower general greets your highness Prince Yan and Marshal Gu." Both were his former students, so neither would allow him to bow. They immediately strode forward to raise Zhong Chan from his obeisance. Gu Yuan's gaze caught on old General Zhong's hand. The back of it was speckled with age spots, his hand so withered it was only skin and bone, the picture of decline and deterioration. Zhong Chan was already past 70 years of age. His back was still straight as an arrow, but his hair had gone white. Even the few dozen kilograms of light-pelt armor were too much for his body to bear. He wore a symbolic suit of thin armor plates in its stead. Guyuan looked at him with countless emotions swirling in his heart. He'd once envied old General Zhong to no end and wished he could follow in his teacher's footsteps, lay down his official position and title of nobility, change his name, and roam the Jianghu, thwarting all attempts to track him down. How carefree a life would that be? But despite his deep envy, before Guyuan could manage to lay down his own burdens, old General Zhong had returned to his service of the country in his advanced age. One in the north and one in the south, the two worked themselves to the bone. Guyuan felt as if he'd seen firsthand the unavoidable cycle of fate. Zhongchan leveled Changgang with an unreadable look, then scanned Guyuan from head to toe. "Marshal Gu, you look unwell." "I received imperial orders to ensure the envoys Prince Yan and Commissioner Xu's safe return to the capital," Guyuan said with a smile. "But I'd barely started my mission when our ship went down behind enemy lines. I was scared half to death. How can I look well?" "In that case, let's discuss a welcome banquet for the lords at a later time," Zhongchan said breezily. "Chongzi, make arrangements for our guests to bathe and change. We can continue our conversation after they've had a chance to rest. We are in a state of alert, and there are military affairs that require attention. Please excuse this lower general's absence." Zhongchan gave Prince Yan one last look and cupped his fist at him in a rather lukewarm gesture, then turned on his heel and left without a backward glance. Changgang sensed the old general disapproved of his handling of the situation, so he stood aside and held his tongue. At Zhongchan's age, he had one foot in the grave. He was due to see the late emperor any day now. He'd no need to make nice with anyone, and every one of the high-ranking, powerful figures in court was his junior. Whether it was before Prince Yan or the Marquis of Anding, he never minced words. Xu Ling, fresh from his brush with death, reeled at the old general's attitude. Yao Jun was left alone to endure a splitting headache as he strained his weary brain to joke and cajole and smooth things over, all while bustling about arranging tents for everyone so they could rest. Guyuan wasted no time freshening up and changing out of his rain-sodden clothes. Before he could do more than that, the fatigue finally hit. After giving orders that he was not to be disturbed, he fell dead asleep in his tent. When he awoke, it was dark. Guyuan's sight was blurry, the sounds around him muffled. No sooner had he stirred than a pair of hands reached out and considerately offered him a few sips of tea to wake him, then presented him with a bowl of familiar-smelling medicine. There was no need to ask to whom these hands belonged. Guyuan hadn't much energy in the first place, and his body felt heavier after sleeping. He was in no mood to give Changgang attention. He took hold of the bowl and drained it in one draught before collapsing back into his pillow, then focused on resting his eyes as he waited for the medicine to take effect. Changgang sat quietly at his side, using his fingers in place of silver needles to apply a perfect amount of pressure along the acupoints at Guyuan's head and neck. Guyuan grew drowsy under his ministrations, the bit of alertness in him like the flame of a lamp struggling in the wind, flickering in and out. After a time, the clarity of his hearing and the endless piercing pain in his head swelled simultaneously. Guyuan was at last roused to full consciousness and unconsciously furrowed his brow. Changgang paused in his movements and dipped to drop a light kiss on the crease between Guyuan's brows, a brief experimental touch. Perhaps because Guyuan didn't react, his courage grew, and he pressed a trail of kisses down the bridge of Guyuan's nose before coming to land on those faintly medicinal-tasting lips. Guyuan had just finished his medicine. His mouth was suffused with bitterness. He didn't much want to kiss Changgang right now, so he tilted his head to evade him. For some reason, this subtle action set Changgang off. His tranquil mood evaporated, and his breathing grew rapid as his hands sank into the bed to lock Guyuan within his arms. He attacked with an indescribable hint of despair, as if he wasn't trying to kiss Guyuan, but tear at him out of some deep-set grudge. Guyuan tried to pinch the back of his neck, but Changgang caught his hand and clamped it down to the bed. He was climbing all over him now. Frowning, Guyuan twisted and knocked Changgang's elbow against the bed frame with moderate force, hitting him right in the funny bone. Changgang flinched in pain and reflexively let go, but within an instant, he heedlessly clutched at Guyuan again. With a push and a grab, Guyuan pinned him down in a grappler's hold. Do you remember where we are? What sort of madness is this? Changgang's breathing was frighteningly heavy. He clung to Guyuan as if clinging to life. Even pinned as he was, he wouldn't let go, stubbornly twisting his arm to grab at Guyuan until the bones of his wrist gave a sharp crack. This astonishingly obstinate man would rather injure himself than back down. Guyuan obviously didn't want to break his wrist, but the moment he loosened his grip, Changgang was on him again, as if he meant to cage him within the narrow confines of the bed. He stared down at Guyuan from above, his eyes like those of a hungry wolf, greedy, yet afraid, as if he was ready to throw it all away, yet also as if he was constantly anxious and on his guard. Guyuan's blurry vision gradually sharpened. He took in his surroundings and realized he had accidentally slept the day away. He'd fallen into bed at dawn, and it was already past dusk, the canopy of night descending overhead. In the dim light, he peered into Changgang's eyes, but failed to find that ominous bloody glow in double pupils. Changgang was sensible. He was simply throwing a tantrum. Who knew how long this standoff lasted? In the end, the viciousness in Changgang's eyes faded like a passing tide, the churning water receding to reveal a look of unspeakable imploring. Zushi, You what? Guyuan asked, his voice chilly. Changgang shrank back before his gaze and released him. His body was as stiff as a wooden puppet as his eyes slid closed and he sat, defeated, to the side. He was entirely too attuned to Guyuan's moods, so attuned that Guyuan didn't need to speak a word. A single glance could leave him stricken. Silence reigned in the small tent. It was quiet enough to hear a pin drop. At long last, Changgang broke the stillness, his voice low. With this southward expedition, I will force Li Feng to stand on my side and ascertain how much furor the noble families of the court can raise. These people are set in their old ways, and they aren't as united as they seem. If I make too drastic a move in the capital, I risk pushback. It makes more sense to use Jiangbei as a breakthrough point, lure them into lowering their guard, and sow division among them so they'll take the bait. I'll use the opportunity to push new officials into power. Then I can take the next step, eliminating dissent and cleaning up the court. There seemed to be a hidden current running beneath his terse explanation. Resettling the refugees was the one thing he never mentioned, as if he was purposefully avoiding the topic in a fit of pique. He refused to say one positive word about himself and insisted on painting everything in the most sinister, petty, and shameless light. Who didn't know of Prince Yan's facility for speaking the language of whomever he met? As long as he set his mind to it, his silver tongue could tame even an old porcupine like Zhang Fenghan until he was eating out of the palm of his hand. But before Guyuan, Changgang felt as if he had transformed into a younger version of the same Master Fenghan, saying everything Guyuan least wanted to hear. Once he'd opened his mouth, he couldn't stop it all spitting out. He took a pause to breathe and continued. I gave these newly promoted officials a leg up with the war beacon tickets. If I form them into a party during our national emergency, I won't need to do any more to support them in the future. I'll simply need to give them some attention for everything to fall in place and a major faction to be formed. They'll be champing at the bit to topple the old court and the old system. I'll see to it that the absolute dominion the emperor has held over heaven and earth since the reign of Emperor Wu ends with this generation. As for Li Feng, I care not a whit what happens to him. I won't be satisfied until the entire house of Li is dead. Guyuan had put the pieces together by now. This bastard felt guilty, so he was brandishing his claws in a show of false bravado. Only after he'd picked a fight and argued it out would he feel at ease. Have it your way, Guyuan fumed. So your surname isn't Li then? Is it Pig, or is it Dog? Guyuan snarled back. Me? Changgang huffed out a sharp laugh. I'm much worse than any pig or dog. I'm a mere living puppet of the barbarian shamaness. Before he could finish, Guyuan raised the hand to slap him across the face. Changgang instinctively closed his eyes. He forced himself not to dodge by sheer will. Guyuan's hand whipped through the air, but stopped just short of Changgung's face, coming to rest beside his neck. Merit or missteps are judged by the people of the world. Why throw yourself at me asking for praise or begging for a scolding? Guyuan tried to keep his voice low, but with every additional word, sincere anger rose in him. You're going into conniptions to force me to say you can do anything at all. Whatever you do is right. I'll endorse you with whole heart no matter what disgraceful actions you take. Would that satisfy you? Would you sleep well at night? Would your conscience be appeased? His voice was like a knife, leaving a bloody gash with every word. Changgong sucked in breath after breath of cold air as if in terrible pain. Trembling, he asked, "What does the world have to do with me? It's all the people of the world who've betrayed me. I've never owed this world a thing. What do I care what its people have to say? But everyone needs something worth treasuring. Zushi, in all my life, I've never been able to treasure anything. It was all you. If you would take this from me, you may as well tell me how to die, and I'll go at once." "Ho ho! What? Your Highness Prince Yan is going to die for me?" Guyuan nearly laughed in anger. "If there's one thing I hate the most, it's when other people threaten me." Changgong began to shake, as if he'd fallen into a cellar of ice. Before this row, he hadn't been able to speak to Guyuan the whole day and had been uneasy in the extreme. He'd very much wanted to strike the perfect balance of words and action, just as when he'd fooled Xu Ling and come here to beg for understanding. It would have been no difficult task. But even with 1,000 reasons for him to do so, he was perfectly aware that he was simply unwilling and unable. It seemed that love bewitched the mind. Like a double-edged sword without a hilt, it could maim wielder as easily as opponent. Guyuan shoved him away. Startled, Changgong reached out to grab him in a panic. "Zushi!" Guyuan snatched his reaching wrist and forced him to open his hand, then pulled out an object and smacked it hard across Changgong's palm. Changgong shuddered. His Highness Prince Yan, whose palm had never been slapped by a teacher in his life, was so shocked he forgot to struggle. Guyuan had used that white jade flute to smack him. If you see yourself as a pig or a dog, who will see you as a person? If you don't value yourself, why should anyone spoil you when you throw a fit? How pathetic can you be? How shameless! How wretched! He punctuated each reprimand with a strike to Changgong's palm. The flute came down 3 times in the exact same spot, leaving a clean red line across his skin with no blur at the edges. Guyuan raised the white jade flute to tilt Changgong's chin up. What does it matter how others treat you? If others respect you, revere you, does that make you invincible? If others disdain you like a pair of tattered shoes, does that make you an actual fucking clod of rotten mud? What can some insignificant barbarian woman who's been dead for about 800 years or some obscure shamanic poison that disturbs one's mind do to you now? Look at me when you speak. Changgong could summon no response. Everyone says His Highness Prince Yan could fill 5 carriages with the fruit of his learnings. Yet I see he doesn't know what it means to conduct himself with dignity. What exactly do you have in those 5 carriages? Toilet paper? Guyuan tossed his jade flute away and sighed. You waited all day just to ask for a beating. Well, your wish has been granted. Get out. Changgong stared blankly, sitting on the edge of the bed and clutching his swollen red hand. The sear of pain brought him back to his senses, and he looked up at Guyuan in disbelief. Turning back to Changgong, Guyuan poured himself a cup of cold tea and slowly drained it. When the fire of his anger had cooled, he asked, "How long will it take to complete the resettlement of refugees in the Liangjiang area?" Changgong's voice was hoarse. "It'll be the end of the year at the earliest." Guyuan asked yet another of Xu Ling's questions. "And when will we have the capability to fight our enemies on the northern border in Jiangnan?" Changgong closed his eyes. "Their western nation is not unified in its purpose," he said quietly. "Thanks to this expedition, we know that the Pope's position is in peril. They're sure to send an emissary for peace talks within the year. If we play along and use the next year or 2 to recover our strength, we will be poised to support an all-out assault." Guyuan was silent for a beat. "And after the war ends, How long will the peace last? When a nation is rich and strong, its neighbors on all four shores will pledge their allegiance willingly. Guyuan nodded. Well then, off you go. Chang'e didn't understand at first. Go where? Weren't you going to investigate Yang Rongwei's corruption and cover up in Jiangbei with Commissioner Xu? Was I off the mark? Weren't you planning to leave by night? Or were you waiting for Zhonglao to throw you a welcoming banquet first? Chang'e stared at him vacantly. I have to stay in the Jiangbei garrison for a few more days, Guyuan said. Take the 20 guards with you. Unless the Westerners cross the river with their navy, 20 men will be enough to deal with any local officials, hired thugs, and lackeys. Night is falling now. You mustn't tarry. Chang'e stood up without a word and straightened his disheveled clothing. Also, Guyuan paused, put some medicine on your hand when you get a chance. Chang'e turned away with difficulty. He seemed to struggle within himself for a time. He quietly said, Yifu, I want you. For a moment, Guyuan thought his ears had acquired some new affliction. What did you say? Chang'e didn't repeat himself. His ears went red, and he glanced evasively toward Guyuan, eyes burning with desire as he tried to burrow their way under Guyuan's snowy white collar. No matter how much of a playboy Guyuan might be, he played in the normal way. When it came to those kinds of matters, he maintained the decadent customs of noble sons. He was particular about such elegant aesthetics as amidst flowers and beneath the moon and where water flows, a channel forms. He honestly couldn't comprehend such interests as would lead one to insist on calling someone Yifu in bed or go into heat after receiving a beating. Scalp prickling, he thought to himself, he really is off his rocker. He pointed at the tent's door and said simply, out. Loath to delay his work, Chang'e suppressed his endless thirst and cast Guyuan one last secretive and embarrassed look. Then he smoothed his turbulent emotions into calm and fled. Chapter 90. True and False. When the storm that had burst across the coastal region of Liangjiang cleared, it wasn't replaced by a blue sky washed clean of clouds as it would be in the north. Instead, it grew ever hotter and more humid. The Jiangbei garrison had started off as a patchwork army, but after a mere year under old General Zhong's command, it had come together into a fit fighting force. If the enemy garrison Guyuan and the others had infiltrated on the opposing bank had this degree of discipline, it wouldn't have been so easy to turn the place upside down. Guyuan and Zhongchan walked shoulder to shoulder and led their horses. Neither wore armor, and they kept comfortable pace with each other, neither thinking the other too slow. I haven't had free time in years, Guyuan said. I don't know how long it's been since I last had a conversation with Shifu. Zhongchan cared little for formalities and placidly accepted the Marquis of Anding calling him Shifu in private. The young Marquis has been growing much steadier in temperament, he said. If the old Marquis were alive to see your accomplishments, he would surely beat me to death, Guyuan finished for him. Zhongchan started, a faint smile appearing on the knife-sharp lines of his face. There is no need to disparage yourself. The wind off the river blew from the south, and the moisture in the air made their surroundings feel everywhere damp. Guyuan brushed his long, unbound hair aside and stared toward the southern shore in silence. Recalling the abandoned village and bleached bones he had witnessed there, the smile slipped from his face. Zhongchan followed his gaze. He patted Guyuan's shoulder. Fate is no easy thing to divine. The greatest sages find it difficult to move against the pull of the world, to say nothing of common men like us. If I may use my advanced age as an excuse to say something rather heretical, never mind the old Marquis, even if your grandfather, Emperor Wu, were alive today, he might fare a little better than we have. We can only do what is humanly possible. We must leave the rest up to fate and leave ourselves no regrets. Guyuan blinked in surprise. His old teacher was well versed in the art of war and boasted accomplishments both martial and literary. He had been merciless while instructing Guyuan all those years ago. His time wandering the Jianghu had softened him. We have no fear of a land battle, Zhongchan continued. The primary issue is that our navy is still lacking. Look at those Westerners. They either sail the seas or stay near the riverbank. They know our navy can't match them. I've gained some insights into the art of naval battle recently, but I'm hardly an expert. You're not going anywhere for a few days. If you have time, let's compare notes. Guyuan nodded. I know. Our sea dragons are inferior to theirs. We were lucky enough to capture a Western dragon this time. I'll have Guchan bring it back to the capital and see if the Lingshu Institute has any ideas. Zhongchan sighed. Soldiers can be trained, but when it comes to equipment and violet gold, it's out of this old man's hands. I'm relying on youngsters like you to manage the situation as best you can. Guyuan's eyes flickered. He thought he knew where old General Zhong was headed with this. As expected, Zhongchan continued. Prince Yan accompanied me for some years in his youth. Yes, I know. Thank you for your trouble, Shifu. Then you know he holds the Lingyuan tablet? Guyuan paused. He wanted to say he didn't, but it would have pricked his conscience, so he relented and told the truth. He hasn't mentioned it to me, but I've had my guesses. I figured that if not for the Lingyuan pavilion, the god of wealth and the rest wouldn't have been so quick to support him. Zhongchan grunted acknowledgement. When Prince Yan was young, he displayed no youthful arrogance and was disciplined and calm to a fault. His temperament was a bit stubborn, but not self-pitying or narcissistic. He saw things clearly and knew to put benevolence and justice first, much better than you when you were his age. Guyuan held his tongue. Zhongchan narrowed his eyes at him, the ghost of a smile flickering across his face. But the way I see it, sometimes it's good for youth to be a little frivolous. The way he was so mature beyond his years was inhuman. It must be that he suffered too much as a child. That Chung girl told me what that barbarian shamaness did to him. So, what are your plans? Guyuan didn't respond right away, sunk in thought. He's not plagued by Wu-Er-Ge of his own volition. Zhongchan continued. Sometimes I wonder if my misgivings toward him are unfair. If he were an ordinary child from an ordinary family, I wouldn't have the right to comment. But he is not. He is connected to the fate of the nation. Sushi, in today's imperial court, Prince Yan is the thread that could unravel the whole. The court needs him, but it can't rely wholly on him. Do you understand? Guyuan could hear the unspoken implications in old General Zhong's words. His teacher wanted Guyuan to have a backup plan. He wanted to make sure Prince Yan didn't grow too powerful, and if necessary, he wanted Guyuan to use his military might to ensure Chang'e stepped back when the time came. Guyuan didn't pursue this line of conversation. He said simply, I'll keep an eye on him. Shifu, you needn't worry. Zhongchan frowned. I know he's been with you since he was small, and there are deep bonds of affection between you. But how long can you keep your eye on him, really? The Chun family head of this generation is that girl. She's still young. It will probably be another 8 to 10 years before we can rely on her. Can Prince Yan hold out that long? Every day I'm still alive is a day I'll ensure his mind is clear, Guyuan said. If he does lose control one day, I can handle it. Tens of thousands of Black Iron Battalion soldiers guard the gate of our nation in the northwest. I won't let him do anything foolish. Zhongchan was mildly taken aback. He thought, for an instant, that he detected a different sort of meaning in those words. As the two generals fretted behind his back, Chang'e arrived in Yangzhou with Xu Ling, accompanied by the 20 guards Guyuan had lent him. Disguising their party as refugees would have stretched the imagination, so they had instead impersonated merchants. Their cover story was this. The proprietor of a branch of one of the God of Wealth's pawn shops in Lin'an Prefecture had been forced to flee to Jiangbei because of the war, but had no work there. It was commonly known that the Chamber of Commerce had requested the emperor's authorization to build factories along the canal to give the refugees a place to work. Although the court had yet to approve the request, it seemed to have a good chance of success. Thus, this proprietor had been ordered to head north and do some preliminary field work. The name of the pawn shop in Lin'an and the identity and age of the real proprietor made it a suitable role for Chang'e to play. Du Wanquan had made all the arrangements. Even if someone were to investigate, they wouldn't find any holes. Secure in their flawless story, they strutted into Yangzhou. Duanquan was the entire nation's god of wealth, and with Chang'eng's support, memorials from his Chamber of Commerce went directly to the Grand Council. His people had all the grandeur of major imperial merchants and wielded significantly more power than the minor officials of the region. The local officials had to flock over to greet the god of wealth's men on principle. Yang Rongwei, being a member of the Liu family, had no affection for Duanquan. Even so, he had a need to maintain appearances. He held a banquet to welcome Chang'eng and his entourage in Flying Eve's pavilion. In the years since the Westerners invaded and turmoil rocked the nation, the New Year's Palace banquet had been much reduced in scale. After Kite's Flight Pavilion toppled, it had never been re-erected. It had been a very long time indeed since Xuling had looked upon such scenes of opulence. This Flying Eve's Pavilion had an excellent reputation and was known as Little Kite's Flight. Though it wasn't so grand in scale as Moonshot Platform and the Great Yunmeng Outlook had been, its exquisite luxury may have exceeded Kite's Flight Pavilion in its day. The capital had banned extravagant entertainments long ago, but Jiangbei was remote and the emperor was far. No one cared. The lilting notes of songstresses in Flying Eve's pavilion could be heard a street away, and gaily dressed men and women streamed in and out without cease. Xuling clicked his tongue in awe at the sight and turned to Chang'eng, eyes wide. "Your high proprietor, is your estate this grand?" Chang'eng shook his head with a smile. "Certainly not. I have just enough to keep me warm and fill my belly. The master of the house spends all his money supporting widows and orphans. He has no head for budgeting. He's going to end up selling his ancestral home someday." Xuling started in surprise, then realized that Chang'eng wasn't talking about the empty Princian estate, but the estate of the Marquis of Anding. By supporting widows and orphans, he must have meant bereavement payments. A few years ago, when the nation wasn't at war, the emperor wished to reduce military expenditures because of the sorry state of the national treasury. The meager sum allotted to deceased soldiers' families decreased time and again. Even after countless fights with military representatives, the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of War delayed addressing the matter, shirking responsibility at every turn. In the event that the representatives really couldn't get the money, the Marquis of Anding would often go ask for it in person. But Guyuan returned to the capital once every couple of years. He was too far from the court to be of assistance most of the time. He must have ended up making up the difference himself quite often. The court had let things slip in times of peace, yet now that war had come, all it took were a few golden words to the tune of, "The local garrisons have first access to all the resources of the state," from the emperor's mouth, and these matters became a national priority. In a few years' time, if their lost territory was recovered, the bereaved families filling the cities would probably find themselves patching old clothes by lamplight to get by again. Xuling felt ever more conflicted. "In a bit, we penniless paupers will probably end up embarrassing ourselves," Chang'eng said quietly. "But it's no matter. They want us to embarrass ourselves so they can have a joke at our expense. As it happens, I've prepared a little joke of my own." Xuling decided he would take Prince Yan as his sole guide. He spoke not a word of objection as he followed Chang'eng inside, bursting with lofty ambitions of scrubbing the filth from society. The banquet had been hosted in Yang Ronggui's name. Assistant Minister Liu's brother-in-law held the title of Governor of Liangjiang. It sounded impressive enough, but in these extraordinary times, he didn't hold much power. Jiangnan was in the hands of the enemy, and the Jiangbei garrison governed itself. Most of the Huainan region also wasn't under his control, so his actual sphere of influence was only Yangzhou Prefecture and a handful of its surrounding territories. He had been hastily promoted because the court needed a high-ranking border official who could make arrangements for all the refugees and stabilize the area behind the front lines. If Yang Rongui showed himself capable, his achievements would certainly earn him a permanent position as one of the 8 governors when the lost territory in Jiangnan was recovered. Unfortunately, it was human nature to imitate the snake that attempted to swallow an elephant. Yang Rongwei had been dissatisfied with the situation in Jiangbei since his appointment. More than once, while in his cups, he had grumbled to his confidants that he held the title of governor, but was in effect no better than a prefectural magistrate. As sorry as Governor Yang found himself, he was no less arrogant for it. The Liu family stood behind him, and he naturally held no affection for the newly promoted court officials supported by Du Wanquan. Likewise, he obviously wouldn't lower himself to greet a few merchants in person. He sent some petty officials of Yangzhou to entertain them, who had spent their idle hours honing the gift of gab. The prefectural magistrate of Yangzhou, Zheng Kun, deigned to appear partway through the banquet. He sat for less than the duration of a fart, offered a few vapid words, and hadn't even finished speaking those before one of his attendants entered and whispered in his ear. The prefectural magistrate's face paled, and he rose to leave then and there. Xu Ling had assumed the name Zhang Dafu. He was naturally pale, and the way his face flushed when he drank made him appear especially simple and honest. He forced himself to affect drunkenness and tried to make his probing questions seem casual. "We've not yet drunk 3 rounds of wine. Why is Magistrate Zheng leaving so soon?" A man sitting nearby laughed. "Zheng Xiong, maybe you haven't heard. Governor Yang originally planned to attend this banquet as well. It's too bad you arrived at the wrong time. I hear that guy—" Rather flippantly, he waved his arms like a swan goose flapping its wings and continued quietly, "is arriving in Yangzhou Prefecture this very day. Governor Yang took a bunch of officials to welcome him in person." Xu Ling thought he had misunderstood. "Who?" he asked in shock. "What, Zhang Xiong doesn't know?" Their host had drunk too much and couldn't quite work his tongue. "Prince Yan, Prince of the first rank Yan, Yan as in goose. Ever heard of him? The emperor's own brother. I didn't want to mention such an irritating thing, but a while ago, some unruly commoner decided to lodge a complaint against the governor and took it all the way to the capital. The emperor took it seriously and actually sent Prince Yan down here. Now, there's a real big shot. If we don't keep him happy, who knows when our heads might roll for all to see." The man added with exaggerated, unsteady gestures, "We're perfectly innocent. A man who stands up straight needn't worry his shadow will be crooked. The prince can investigate however he likes. But it'll be a pain for Governor Yang and the others to keep him company the whole time." Shilling's neck creaked around to gaze at Changdeng, who was attending this very banquet. The real Prince Yan was right here. Who had Yang Rongwei and the others received? Prince Yan offered him an enigmatic smile and shoved a crystal dumpling into his mouth without reservation. Why let food go to waste? First, they had crashed down behind enemy lines, and now a whole living person had appeared out of thin air. Thank the heavens that even as a scholar, Commissioner Xu was flexible and adept at improvisation. Otherwise, Prince Yan would have frightened him to death with these shocks by now. It was a meal in which neither guest nor host were happy, and it ended with no one having tasted their food. Xu Ling shooed off a few dancers who had tried to attach themselves to himself and Prince Yan, and the pair rushed back to the inn. After confirming they were completely alone, Xu Ling closed the door and said, "Your Highness, how is there another—" Changdeng smiled. "Governor Yang has countless eyes and ears. Surely he knows when the imperial envoy left the capital. If no capital envoy arrives, won't he become paranoid?" Xu Ling considered the truth of this, but still had his doubts. "But Yang Rongwei has met your Highness before. What if this person slips up?" "We've only met once or twice, and we've never spoken at closer than 100 paces. He's not that familiar with me. My friend knows some Jianghu techniques, and if there's one person he can be relied on to impersonate, it's me. So don't worry. Get some rest when you get back to your room. We have plans tonight." Xu Ling surmised that Prince Yan must intend to investigate the refugee quarters by now, and his spirits perked up. Around midnight, the pair slipped out of the city in the company of 2 Black Iron Battalion guards. Their group made straight for the refugee quarters on the city's outskirts. These so-called quarters were in reality little more than a few shacks on the fringes of Yangzhou City. The summer was hot and humid, so the inhabitants wouldn't be cold even if they slept under the open sky. A troop of city guards were stationed nearby to prevent any trouble, and a few large pots stood empty at the side of the road from which the refugees might claim rations of porridge during the day. The refugee quarters were silent this late in the night. A black iron battalion guard went ahead to sneak inside, his footfall so light even the stray cat curled up at the base of the nearby tree didn't stir. Xu Ling said quietly, "Your Highness, something's not right. Places with plague are usually marked with lime, and the ground should be sprinkled with herbal medicine. It shouldn't be so quiet." Changgang's expression remained unchanged. "Yang Rongwei knows we're here. He won't be unprepared. Just watch." Before he finished speaking, the black iron guard returned like a slip of shadow. "Your Highness, there's no more than 30 or so people in the settlement. The majority are young and healthy men and women. There's no sign of plague." 100,000 refugees in Jiangbei, and there's only 30 people in the refugee quarters outside Yangzhou City? Xu Ling sneered. "Yang Rongwei takes us for fools. Do the people inside look sleek and shiny, well-fed, warmly dressed, without a care in the world too? I'd bet they're fake refugees who have been hired." "Your Highness, what should we do?" the guard asked. "We can't do anything with our eyes covered," Changgang replied softly. "Find a way to contact Great Master Liao Zhen, then have our brothers survey the surrounding area for clues. There's no such thing as a wall that lets in no draft. I refuse to believe Yang Rongwei can maintain total control over the situation." That night, a swift steed departed Yangzhou City and galloped north to the capital. Its rider carried a secret missive for ambitious individuals, great and small. Prince Yan had stepped into their trap. At the same time, the city defense forces throughout Jiangbei received a middle-of-the-night order from the governor of Liangzhang. They were to leave their posts in civilian garb and make their way to Yangzhou Prefecture to provide reinforcement. All of Yangzhou was a prosperous scene of song and dance, but it was a relaxed veneer over a tense core. In the capital city, venomous serpents patiently lay in wait, ready to strike a killing blow. It was unusually quiet, and aside from old Mr. Shun's sudden illness, there was nothing else of note. Old Mr. Shun had been bedridden for days. Imperial physicians streamed in and out of the estate, and even miracle doctor Chun came in person. Seeing that their master's condition was dire, the servants of the Shun estate made a few visits to the coffin store. It appeared they were making funeral arrangements. No matter how much of a harridan third Madame Shun might be, she couldn't discuss marriage matches at a time like this. The matter of the engagement had to be dropped. Shun Yi requested leave to take care of his father and shut the gates of the estate, taking no guests. At dusk, Miss Chun, who paid a call to the Shun estate every day, left by carriage as usual, inviting no attention from those who watched from the shadows. When the carriage reached the remote little courtyard Miss Chun occupied when in the capital, the door opened and out floated a trill of music and a man. It was Shun Yi himself, who should have been performing his filial duties at his father's bedside. Shun Yi politely cupped his hands toward the open door of the carriage. "Many thanks, Miss Chun." A guqin lay across Chen Qingshu's lap. With a seated bow, she said, "General, take care. Please let me know if you have further instructions." Shun Yi looked back at her carefully. He had no knowledge of the Linyuan pavilion and thought Chen Qingshu merely a woman with no office and no power, an ordinary child of the Jianghu. Yet there she was, willing to rough it in the wilderness and eat sand alongside the army, following their every request. He felt sincere gratitude toward her and earnestly said, "Miss Chun is a woman of honor, with the bearing of a famed hero. I truly admire you. A few words of thanks are hardly enough for the assistance you've rendered." Chen Qingshu seemed to smile. Her smiles weren't obvious, and her anger wasn't either. It was as if nothing in the mundane world, no favor nor humiliation, could sway her. She left accompanied by the thrum of plucked strings. Shun Yi dared not tarry longer. Leaping onto his horse, he rode hard toward the northern outskirts of the capital. And there we have it, readers by eyes and by ears. The end of Stars of Chaos Volume 3, Chapeau by Priest. And I'll be honest with you guys, there are things I want to say, but I just feel like I can't right now because I really need to digest these last 4 chapters again before I can really form any words, because there are a lot of intricacies that I feel like are probably missed by my eyes and my brain the first time around. So I'm going to upload these videos and literally listen to them, which I do anyway, to gather more insight. Anyway, we have officially completed the 3rd volume and I'm so happy. So that means we're moving on to volume 4 next time. And you guys already know, well, Eineman.